My parents chose to side with my former spouse, contributing to the downfall of my marriage, only to later plead for a reconnection when I found success. Just a few days ago, I unexpectedly encountered my ex-husband and my family at a local market. The surprise was so overwhelming that I froze in place, my mind racing with the question, what are they doing here? In that moment, I was at a loss for how to respond, but a torrent of emotions surged through me: anger, frustration, sadness, and a flicker of anxious satisfaction. To truly grasp why this encounter affected me so deeply, I need to rewind several years to the moment my life took a dramatic turn. My story begins with my upbringing. I was raised in a household where expectations loomed large and felt unattainable. My father, a prominent attorney, and my mother, a well-respected entrepreneur in our social circles, were explicit about their aspirations for me. They envisioned a future where I would attend a prestigious university, secure a high-profile job, and eventually start a family that would be the envy of our community. Yet, from a young age, I sensed that I could never meet those lofty standards. Despite my efforts, I graduated with a degree in business administration from a university that, while respectable, didn't quite meet their expectations. Instead of pursuing a position at a major corporation or a trendy startup, I opted for a management role at a small local business in Dallas. I made this choice because I craved balance in my life, something that would allow me to nurture my passions without sacrificing my mental well-being. To my family, however, it felt as if I had declared my aspirations to be minimal. When I met the man who would become my husband, I believed I had finally found someone who understood me. He was charming, full of life, and often expressed admiration for my authenticity. After 2 years of dating, we tied the knot, and for a time, I thought we were a solid couple. Initially, he supported my choices and appreciated my outlook on life. I believed our relationship was built on a foundation of respect and mutual understanding, but I was gravely mistaken. The issues began to surface after our marriage when he became increasingly influenced by my family. My parents were never shy about expressing their disappointment in my career choices, often asking, "Don't you think it's time to aim higher?" or "Are you sure this is the future you want for your family?" At first, my husband brushed off their comments, but gradually, their words began to seep into his mind. Over time, he shifted from defending my decisions to questioning them, suggesting that perhaps I should strive to reach my true potential. I tried to convey to him that I was content with my life and had no desire to sacrifice my well-being in pursuit of a success that didn't resonate with me. Yet, my arguments seemed inadequate. The situation escalated one evening after dinner at my parents' house. Throughout the night, they had made veiled comments about how I wasn't fully utilizing my education and talents. On the drive home, my husband fell silent, and once we arrived, he erupted. He told me he felt trapped, that he saw no future with me, and that he couldn't bear being married to someone he perceived as lacking ambition. His words struck me like a devastating blow. In the months that followed, our marriage devolved into an emotional battleground. I fought to salvage our relationship, but it felt as though every effort only pushed him further away. To complicate matters, my family not only failed to support me but actively reinforced his insecurities. I vividly recall a conversation with my father that still stings. "He's right, he deserves better, and you should aspire to more." In that moment, I realized they were, in fact, aligned with him, not me. After months of mounting tension, my husband requested a divorce. The most painful realization was discovering that my family had played a significant role in his decision. Although I had sensed our relationship deteriorating, I had always held on to the hope that we could mend it. What I didn't know at the time was that my family had been subtly encouraging him to seek someone more suitable. To them, I was a disappointment, and they didn't hesitate to use my marriage as a means to validate that belief. During the divorce proceedings, my parents were surprisingly cordial to him, which only deepened my hurt. My mother even offered him a place in our guest house while he got back on his feet. I will never forget the day I overheard my father tell him, "You're an incredible man, you deserve someone who can match your potential." Those words, directed at the man who was dismantling our marriage, made me feel like a stranger in my own family. When the divorce was finalized, I felt utterly isolated. My parents made it clear they did not support my choices, and now I could no longer rely on the emotional backing of the person I had once. My business not only began to flourish, but it also transformed into a space where I could genuinely connect with the community. I started meeting individuals who appreciated what I was doing, and gradually, my confidence began to return. Over time, my coffee shop grew so significantly that I decided to expand, opening 2 additional locations in different neighborhoods of Austin. Before I knew it, I found myself managing an entire team of employees. The best part was that I never compromised my values. My cafes became places where patrons could enjoy a warm atmosphere, where employees were treated with respect, and where success was measured not just by profits but by the positive impact we had on the community. 5 years after my divorce, my life had transformed completely. I had built a successful business from the ground up and discovered an inner peace I had never known before. I had stopped worrying about my family's opinions and learned to define success on my own terms. However, none of that prepared me for the moment I came face to face with them that day at the market. I was in line to buy coffee when I heard a familiar voice. I turned around, and there they were, my parents and my ex-husband. They stood just a few feet away, and I couldn't help but freeze. My parents looked a bit older but just as impeccably put together as always. My ex-husband, while still attractive, wore a more fatigued expression, less self-assured than I remembered. I stared at them for a few seconds until my mother noticed me and smiled. "Look who's here," she exclaimed in an almost triumphant tone, as if this encounter were a long-anticipated reunion. I couldn't believe her attitude. After years of silence and absence, they were acting as if everything was perfectly fine. My father joined in, saying something like, "It's good to see you after so long. You seem to be doing well." I merely nodded, not knowing how to respond. That's when my ex-husband chimed in. "I heard you opened a coffee shop. I've seen some things on social media. It seems like you've done incredibly well." There was a mix of admiration and something else in his voice. Regret? Envy? I wasn't sure, but a part of me couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction at seeing them surprised by how my life had changed. Standing there, I was overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I wanted to remain calm, to show that nothing that had happened affected me. On the other hand, I felt a contained fury that had been building for years. How dare they speak to me as if nothing had transpired after everything they did to undermine my marriage and erode my self-esteem? Instead of voicing my thoughts, I stood still, watching them attempt to fill the awkward silence. My mother, always the first to break the ice, launched into her typical superficial chatter. "We knew you had potential, that's why we always tried to push you to aspire to more." The irony of those words made me want to laugh. Push me? More like crush me until I doubted my very worth. But I held my tongue, letting them continue, wanting to understand why they were there and why they now seemed interested in me. My ex-husband was next to speak. "I heard your coffee shops are quite popular. Congratulations. You've really achieved something great." There was a strange tone in his voice, a mix of kindness and something that sounded like regret. It felt as if he was trying to build a bridge between us, but the truth was that bridge had been burned long ago. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Yes, I've done well. I've worked hard to get here." "And what else have you been up to?" my father asked, trying to sound casual, though his tone carried a hint of nervousness. He was unaccustomed to not having control in our conversations. Throughout my life, he had dictated how things should go, but this time was different. Now, I was on my turf. "Not much else," I said, shrugging my shoulders. "Just working, living my life." "And you? What brings you around here?" That question caught them off guard. My mother stammered something about visiting friends in the area, but it didn't sound convincing. That's when my ex-husband, clearly less comfortable with the exchange, blurted out what seemed to be the real reason for their presence. "Actually, I think we also wanted to see you. It's been years, and well, I think there are many things that were left unsaid." His voice trailed off, as if he wasn't sure what he was trying to achieve. In that moment, I finally felt a sense of control. I looked at my mother, then my father, and finally my ex-husband. Taking a deep breath, I spoke. It's funny to feel the tension in the air as I listened to my father's words. "We thought we were doing what was best for you," he continued, "but we realize now that we didn't provide the support you needed." It was strange to hear him admit a mistake, especially after years of him being so steadfast in his beliefs. I remained silent, absorbing his words, unsure of how to respond. My mother chimed in, "We just want you to know that we regret how things turned out. We never meant to hurt you." Her tone was softer than I remembered, but I could still sense the underlying manipulation. They were trying to pull at my heartstrings, and I was acutely aware of it. "We've missed you," she added, her voice trembling slightly. "We want to be a part of your life again." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. "You missed me?" I echoed, incredulous. "You had years to reach out, to support me, and you chose to turn your backs on me instead. You helped destroy my marriage and then acted as if I didn't exist. Now that I've built a life for myself, you want to come back into it?" My ex-husband interjected, "I know I made mistakes too. I was influenced by your parents, and I regret how I treated you. I've thought about it a lot since we separated." His eyes were earnest, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all too convenient. "I just want a chance to explain myself," he said, his voice low and sincere. I felt a surge of anger. "Explain yourself? You had your chance when it mattered. You chose to listen to them instead of standing by me. You let their opinions dictate our relationship." I could see the hurt in his eyes, but I wasn't ready to forgive or forget. "You all made your choices, and now you want to rewrite history?" My father leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We're not trying to rewrite anything. We just want to understand and maybe find a way to move forward. We're family, and family should support each other." The irony of his words stung. Family? After everything they had done, they wanted to reclaim that title? Family? I scoffed. "You abandoned me when I needed you most. You didn't support me, you actively worked against me. And now, after years of silence, you think you can just waltz back into my life because I've found success?" My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "We were wrong, and we know that now. We just want a chance to make things right." I shook my head, feeling a mix of emotions swirling within me. "You can't just erase the past with a few words. I've spent years rebuilding my life, and I did it without you. I don't need your approval or your support anymore." My ex-husband looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I understand if you don't want to talk to us, but I hope you can at least consider it. We're not the same people we were back then." I felt a flicker of something, maybe it was pity, or perhaps it was the remnants of the love I once had for him. But I quickly pushed it aside. "You may not be the same, but I am. I've moved on, and I'm not interested in reopening old wounds." The silence that followed was heavy. I could see the disappointment etched on their faces, but I felt a sense of liberation. I had stood my ground, and for the first time in a long while, I felt empowered. "I think it's best if you leave," I said firmly. "I need to focus on my life, and I can't do that with you in the picture." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand to stop her. "No more excuses. I've heard enough. I wish you well, but I need to move forward without you." With that, I stood up, signaling that our conversation was over. I walked back into the cafe, leaving them behind. As I returned to my work, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had faced them, spoken my truth, and refused to let their past actions dictate my future. That encounter left me with a mix of emotions, but ultimately, I felt a sense of closure. I knew they might try to reach out again, but I was ready to stand firm in my decision. I had built a life I was proud of, and I wasn't going to let anyone undermine that again. I couldn't help but think there was something more behind his apology. My mother continued, "We only wanted the best for you. We never wanted you to feel inferior, but now we realize that we didn't act in the best way. Everything sounded so rehearsed, so empty. I knew something was amiss, something they weren't saying." That's when my ex-husband spoke up. "I didn't know how to value you either. I let other people's comments influence how I saw you, and that was a mistake. Now I see everything you've achieved, and I realize how much I underestimated you." His words seemed sincere, but I still didn't trust them. "And what do you expect from me now?" I finally asked. "Do you want me to just forget everything and go back to being one big happy family?" Because if that's what you're looking for, you're wasting your time. My parents exchanged glances, and then my mother said something that took me completely by surprise. We want to be a part of your life again. We know we were wrong, but now we see how far you've come. We believe we can fix this. There it was, the truth behind everything. They weren't here out of remorse or guilt, they were here because now that I was successful, they wanted a piece of it. My success was their excuse to return, their way of justifying why it was now worth reconnecting. I looked at the three of them, one by one, and felt an unexpected calmness wash over me. I don't need you to fix anything, I said firmly. My life is better without you in it. So thank you for coming, but there's nothing more to discuss. Without waiting for their response, I got up and walked back to my cafe, closing the door behind me. I watched them leave after a few minutes, clearly frustrated, but this time I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief. I had finally taken control. After that last encounter with my family and my ex-husband, I hoped things would finally calm down. I thought that making it clear to them that I wanted nothing to do with them would be enough for them to give up, but as I feared, things did not end there. The following weeks were an emotional chaos that I never saw coming. First, indirect messages began to arrive through relatives and acquaintances. Uncles, cousins, and even old family friends contacted me by phone or on social media, telling me that I should give my parents a chance. Some were neutral, but others had clearly been influenced by them. They commented things like, "Your parents just want to support you now. Everyone makes mistakes, why don't you try to reconcile?" I knew my family was using these people as intermediaries. It was their way of pressuring me to reconsider. What they didn't understand was that for me, there was nothing to reconsider. My decision was made. For years, I had lived in the shadow of their expectations and manipulations, and I was not going to allow them back into my life to repeat the same story. But then things took a more personal turn. One morning, when I opened my main cafe, one of my employees told me that there was someone waiting outside. When I went out, I found my mother sitting at a table with an expression of concern and weariness on her face. I stood at the door for a moment, wondering if I should just go back inside and leave her there, but something prompted me to confront her. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I just want to talk to you, please, daughter. I can't stand us being like this." I felt a knot in my stomach. As much as I tried to maintain my firm stance, seeing her cry stirred something inside me. Despite everything, she was still my mother, the person who raised me, albeit with many flaws. "Tell me what you have to say, but make it quick." "I don't have time for this," I replied, trying to sound indifferent. "We made mistakes. I made mistakes. I thought I was guiding you towards what was best, but now I understand that I was only pushing you away. Your father and I talked a lot after seeing you at the market, and we know we failed you." Her voice trembled, and for a moment, she seemed genuine. For a few seconds, I considered her words, but something inside me told me that it wasn't the whole truth. I had seen this movie before, the act of remorse that always came with a hidden intention. "And why now?" I asked, my tone harsher. 5 years have passed. I didn't hear from you when I needed you most. Why do you suddenly care now?